Welcome to the System Simplified podcast, where we feature top leaders who share stories on how to successfully systemize a business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, Wendy Klevit here with the System Simplified podcast, where we interview top entrepreneurs, founders, and thought leaders about systematizing a business. And this podcast is being brought to you by Business Success Consulting Group. At Business Success Consulting Group, we create custom processes and tailor-made business systems so businesses can thrive and grow. And today's guest is Wendy Lieber. Hi, Wendy.
Hi.
It's so good to have you here as a guest. We're going to have an amazing conversation.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's all going to be about content, creating content strategy that with specific steps that our listeners can take right away in order to start on that journey with their content strategy. Or if they already have content or they're using content, they'll just take it to the next level and hear advice from you who are you're definitely an expert on that subject. You are the co-founder and the CEO and the co-founder of ContentBacon. Love that name. And we're going to talk about that name. It's so much fun. And it's basically ContentBacon is an inbound marketing resource where you build brands and you help brands that people know, like, and trust, right? And you help entrepreneurs really express their voice and their why throughout their content, which is so important.
Yes, absolutely.
Cool. So before we get started, we have to give a big shout out to Chad Gill.
Yes, Chad.
Yes. So Chad is the one who connected us, and I know he uses you and you're doing a fantastic job for him. And so thank you, Chad, for the great connection.
From Concrete. He does amazing stuff with concrete. He is an expert in the concrete world. So
that's exactly right. He does amazing job with concrete. And then he has also laminate coaching, where he took everything that he learned and how he actually got the freedom from his business to actually teach other business owners on how to achieve the same. So 100%. So check out Chad Gill. I did several podcasts with him, Concrete and laminate coaching. So there we go. Okay, Chad, you got your shout out. That's awesome. All right, Wendy. So, before we dive into the strategy of the content strategy, tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get to be what got you to found ContentBacon and get that going?
Yeah. So I had a previous company called Athena Marketing, and it was more of a boutique consulting company. We did a lot of work with private equity groups and the companies that they owned. And it was more, big picture strategy to help companies with their marketing. And I was really wanting to grow and scale my business. And what I had created with Athena Marketing was not easily scalable. And so I was in a program at the time with entrepreneurs organization called Accelerator. And the whole point of that program was how to grow and scale, over $1 million and beyond. And one of the things that I uncovered while I was in that program is I was really noticing a need for an easier way for companies to tell their story and generate kind of foundational content on a consistent basis. So things like blog content, social media content, monthly newsletters, things that every company should be doing, but sometimes it's hard to get out of your way. So I really just started noticing that as digital content was becoming more and more important, and if you didn't have it, it often had you look like you weren't in business or you weren't innovative, or, we kind of like to say you didn't look alive online. So I started experimenting with subscriptions with my current network, my current, client base, and it took off. And so I decided and met my partner at the time also in the Accelerator program. So decided to kind of go all in on this new concept, new company You mentioned the name. We get asked that question a lot. We just went through, like a great branding exercise, and ContentBacon was the winner. One of the great attributes of a brand is it's memorable and kind of tells a micro story, which our brand does. So that's really how ContentBacon started, was determining that there was a need, there was a gap, and coming up with a way to fulfill on it that was scalable. So I'll mention that very quickly, because I know you're all about processes and systems. And that was really important. That was what held me back with my previous company, is that I really didn't have scalable processes and systems that others could learn and replicate. Everything was kind of dependent on me and all up here. And with ContentBacon, from the very first day that we started kind of planning out this company, we really started it knowing that it wasn't going to be us that did it. And so that we were going to need to create processes that we could train, coach, develop people so that we could scale. And so, very quickly we scaled to, above $1 million, and we're able to graduate into the actual EO program. And, we've been in business now a little over 6 years, and our growth has been significant year over year, every year since, because of the huge need for this type of offering in the marketplace.
For sure. Absolutely. And that's a great story. It's definitely a great example of, like, you knew how it is to have a business that is not scalable or dependent on you, right? And then you go, okay, I really want to scale it. So I'm going to actually create the systems to begin with, so you can actually scale and give it to somebody else to do, as opposed to you doing everything, right? You still have the vision and the ability to execute, but you have other people playing the game with you, and you're not there by yourself.
Yeah. And I think, like, one of the things that can be challenging about that is my previous company, from a profit standpoint, was, very profitable. And when we, started with ContentBacon, obviously, like, the investment you have to make in order to get it to be scalable sometimes has you have to forgo some of that short term for the longer term benefit. And I think that can be challenging for entrepreneurs that are in that, kind of early startup, early growth stage. Is you can kind of sometimes see the answer, but you have to sacrifice sometimes something short term for the long term gain. And, that's sometimes a big hurdle to overcome.
That's very true. It's definitely something that people consider, but what is the alternative, right? I mean, you're facing burnout, you're facing, like, basically just you, and there is no, you can never work on the business because you're always in the business.
100%.
For sure. All right. So let's talk about content strategies and why, first of all, I always like to ask, like, why content is so important for the business. So, I mean, I always like to start with the why. So now the question is, like, why content is so important for the business?
I think it's important because I believe that, I like to say, every company has a compelling story to tell. And most are just doing a really poor job telling their story. They're either doing a poor job telling it, or they're not doing it at all. And that's where the magic is. People do business with people, not companies with companies. You do business with people, and the story of the company, the story of the people behind the company, is really what helps differentiate you and what helps you connect with the right audience. And so having content that supports that is really important for part of the customer journey. And then continuing to tell that story, continuing to connect, continuing to meet your prospects, your customers where they're at, is vital to the ongoing customer journey. So without content, it's really hard to connect with your audience and meet them where they're at, because that's where people are getting their information today. People are doing research when they want, how they want. They're checking you out. Even if you get the best referral, I'm sure you can relate. Chad, told you, hey, talk to Wendy, you didn't just call me or reach out to me, sight unknown. Like you researched me, you made sure I was legit, right? And that's
right.
what everyone does. So even in the best case scenario where you get a referral, you're still being, checked out. And what's online today is how people do that. So there's probably way more reasons, but that's the foundation of why content is so important and why everyone needs to have a content strategy, in my opinion.
100%. So let's talk about the strategy. So what are the key points that need to be in that strategy?
So I think first and foremost is knowing who your audience is, who you're trying to reach. There's a saying, if you try to market to everyone, you market to no one. So, understanding who your ideal customer is, what makes them tick, and then aligning that to what problems you solve for that audience and, how your product or service benefits that audience. So those are kind of the first part. And then it's, gets more tactical in terms of what are your goals? What are your goals for your content strategy? We typically break it down into 3 key buckets. There's content that supports general awareness and education, so people know about you. So, if you don't have anything out there, how would someone either find you or check you out if they were looking for you? So content that drives awareness is, very foundational and where we start. And then from there, we look at it in the buckets of, interest. What do you have that allows someone to raise their hand and get more involved? So content that drives interest, another way that could be said is conversions. So again, that could be someone opting in to your newsletter. That could be someone opting into your podcast. Just different. They may not be ready to be a customer yet or a client yet, but they're letting you know, hey, I want to be part of this community. I want to learn more. And so there's different types of content that support that. And then ultimately, content that has that audience eventually become, revenue for you in some way, shape, or form. So those are kind of the 3 key buckets, awareness, interest, and decision. But then there's also ongoing content to support your current clients. So that's a big piece that a lot of times people forget about. They have this whole community of current and past clients that they forget about that could be great referral sources, could be, growth sources. And then there's the whole employee or, if you work with perhaps, contractors or a referral network. So content for that as well. So
it's really 5 buckets, right? I guess you have 3 buckets for lead generation. So
yes.
That would be like create awareness, then you create interest, and then you help with the decision. And then you have the content to existing and past clients. So that will be, I think I would put it under that same bucket of the strategy, but I would still say, whether you have to know who you're communicating. So if you're communicating to prospective leads, then you have the 3 categories. Then you can communicate to existing and past clients. And sometimes existing and past clients are 2 different audiences as well, because you want to get the past clients back or existing clients, right? And then you have the your support network, like referral partners, potential referral partners, vendors. So that will be communicating to them as well. So, I'd like to ask you for specific examples, but first of all, let's continue the strategy. So we have that, and then we'll start digging into each one. So you said basically we have you have the know who the audience is, what are you trying to communicate, right? And then you have the what are the goals of the communication basically? And then you have those 5 different aspects.
Right. And then based on that, you can map out what type of content supports each of those, how you're going to deliver it, and then how you're going to measure its effectiveness so that you can continue to refine and evolve it.
That's a great strategy. So we have the steps. So now what platforms, like where do you decide what platforms to send that content out on?
Sure. Yeah, so this has become really a lot more important over the past few years as it kind of feels more complex to be able to manage all the channels, because there's your own organic channels, right? So your website, your social media. If you have a CRM, that's a really important component to where do you manage your contacts. And and some of those contacts could be current clients, some could be prospects. So kind of where do you manage that? So really understanding how all of that works together. And there are systems, like we're a HubSpot solutions partner. So for us, we became a HubSpot solutions partner because we were challenged with how to manage all of that ourselves. We had our website on WordPress, we had our CRM, and I believe we were using Pipeline Drive. We had MailChimp for some of our email communication. So we had all these different platforms, and it was really challenging at the end of a month or a period to kind of say, okay, what's working, what's not. So we started exploring a platform, and we chose HubSpot. There's others, Marketo, Infusionsoft, Pardot. So we're platform agnostic, but I think the point is having a platform is really key. And you can start off the way we did and have WordPress, have MailChimp, have a CRM, Zoho or something. But then over time, I believe that integrating into a system where you can see how everything works together and you can really see the effectiveness just makes it easier and more effective. But those are typically the types of platforms you need. And then we're not even talking about if you decide to put some dollars behind some of your content to promote it, that can be another factor. But the basics are your website, your social media, and your CRM, and then how you're going to communicate via email.
Right. And then I agree with having a platform, a good platform that can actually be a solution in terms of being able to push the content out on those are basically like communication lines. Those are lines that, the communication will flow from one to another. I mean, from one person to another, or from your company to other companies or to other people. I mean, it's always not a company in general, but to other people, right? Because somebody has to be at the end of it, the receiving point, actually reading the communication. But then you have a platform that actually easy to put out that content and also measure, because measurement is so important to see how important it is. It's part of the strategy, because then you can reinvest or invest more in those areas that are giving you the return on investment, and know to tweak or change those that do not.
100%.
Yeah. So what would be your advice to a business owner when they're asking, like, how often should I communicate?
Yeah. So we kind of look at it like the basics. Like, what are the basics that every company should have, building a strong foundation that then you can build on. So having a blog section on your site is really important. You can call it articles, you can call it musings, whatever you want to call it. But the reason that that's important is that's a place that you can create content on at least a weekly basis that keeps your website up to date and fresh, and evolves it from being what many have is just like a brochure type site. You go to it once, you never need to go back to it again. We're trying to create your website so that it's a destination for resources, so people will want to come back to again and again, because they can always get something new and helpful. So having, a blog section on your site that you update, again, our belief is weekly is a good place to start. But if that feels like too much, monthly, bi-monthly, start somewhere is always my philosophy. Start somewhere and build. Action begets action. And then
when you're right, just on that point, I want to say, I write, I have blogs. I publish my blog weekly, right? And the more communication, the better. And yes, it is sometimes as entrepreneurs, it can be overwhelming. Like, how am I even going to write one? But that is where you come into the picture. And that's an advice that is basically I hear from almost every entrepreneur that is successful at the interview on my podcast is delegate, outsource. Find the people that are good at what they do and let them do it. Of course, when there is ROI, but if it's being done correctly and follow the strategy, there will always be ROI on communication. You can't err by not communicating. You can't err by communicating. You can err by not communicating enough. Absolutely. So having a professional blog written, it is completely a worthwhile investment. So I think that, like, just for our listeners, if they'll go like, yeah, I would love to have a blog. Wendy is right. We should have a blog weekly, but how am I going to do that? That's the point where they contact you and make sure that, that they have a professional that can do it for them. I just wanted to say that.
I appreciate the plug. Yeah, we have a saying internally, what gets outsourced gets done. And we abide by that philosophy ourselves. We don't try to do it all. And then just to finish answering your question on frequency. So after you have good blog content, that gives you the foundation to do good social media that's compelling, that drives people back to your website, back to your blog. You should also be doing that, a few times a week on all the major platforms, and then a monthly newsletter. And again, having a blog gives you content that you can then repurpose. So at least you're touching your database on a monthly basis, because again, our attention spans, are short. And by having something that's going to be valuable to them. So it's not promotional. It's not, let me try to sell. It's educational. It's, informational. It's entertaining. It's inspirational. Those are kind of like the 4 building blocks we always think through. That gives you a good foundation. And then from that, you can build additional things, and you can do more lead magnets and email nurturing and ebooks and case studies. But starting with the basics gives you the foundation to do all of those things much easier. If you try to start with that first, it can sometimes, be more challenging. And having that foundation in place is what will give you the ROI.
For sure. So what would be some advice that you can give our listeners if they are looking at growing their list, right? Because they go, okay, Wendy, whatever you're saying, all your advice is great, but I don't have enough audience. If I'm going to invest the time and the money in communicating, I want to communicate to a lot of people. So what can I do to grow my mailing list and also grow my following on social media? 2 questions in one.
So with growing your mailing list, giving people a compelling reason to opt in so that they want to hear from you is the easiest way to do that. Although it's not easy, it's the easiest way to do that. And so the first thing you have to look at is your site today, is your social media today, getting traffic? And if it's not getting traffic, then you may need to start there. And a great way to start is the more content you create, the more organic traffic you'll generate as a result, especially if you're writing about things that people are searching for. One of the things we always, coach prospects that may not be ready to outsource with us, but want to do it on their own is think about all the questions that your current prospects are asking you or your competitors, or you wish they would ask, and use those as topics to start writing about. Because the likelihood, if they're asking you during the sales process, the likelihood that they're typing it into Google as a question is high. And so that will start to allow you to generate more traffic. And then if you have things on your site that your audience can opt into, that is compelling, like, hey, get our weekly, resource full of tips and hacks, or get our monthly, newsletter full of, the best of the best, blogs from the previous month, or download this ebook that has all the answers to your, hot burning questions. So if you, think about it, in terms of, am I getting traffic? And then how do I convert that traffic? That's the organic way to do it. On social, it's similar. People in the early days of social, it was pretty easy to get engagement because it was so new. Now it's just one other thing, and it's still super important, But what people, especially companies, have forgotten is that social is meant to be social. So if you're expecting just to post on social every week and that to be, some type of, game changer for your business, you're going to be really disappointed. It's important to post every week so you look alive, you look relevant. But if you really want to engage your audience, you have to be engaging. And that means you have to comment on other people's posts, give before you get. If people are liking or commenting on your post, you have to engage with them. And that is a huge piece that companies have forgotten, is that social media is called social for a reason. And you have to be willing to invest. And then, using those guides, conversion opportunities, kits, resources to provide value. And so that someone has a reason to engage with, you and opt into something will allow you to grow your list. There's easier ways to do it too. You can put some paid dollars behind it, but you still have to have the foundational content first before you use paid to highlight that content.
For sure. Great advice. And I love what you just said in terms of the engagement on the social media, right? It's social. So if you, definitely spend some time engaging and answering and commenting, and then you get noticed. So I think this is a great advice. And that's part of push the content, your content out there, but also look at what other people are putting out there and get engaged. So I think it's a great advice.
Yeah, and it could be as little as 5-10 minutes a day. I mean, even to start 5-10 minutes a week, you'd be surprised, because think about when the last time someone commented on one of your posts, or it's like you want to engage with that person, you want to get to know them. It feels good. There's like an acknowledgement, and we're human beings after all, and all of these channels give us the opportunity to be more human. Unfortunately, a lot of the approach is let's look at it as robotic and just, check the box, but forget about being human. I'm sure everyone on this podcast can relate to the barrage of automated LinkedIn messages you get from, whether it's just a robot or a canned message that has no personalization. And how do we feel about that? It's not compelling at all.
It's not at all, and I interviewed Alice Tang on my podcast. It's one of my previous episodes, and it's her website is askalistang.com, and she's all about relationships and creating your network. Your network is your net worth, right? And how to actually build your network correctly. And she's all about engagement on social media. You should see her LinkedIn and how she actually thoughtfully looks at other people's whatever they post on LinkedIn, and if it resonates with her, she actually genuinely writes a comment that makes sense and that it is in alignment with the post, and it gets that engagement. But then you look at her LinkedIn and you can see people are engaging with her because she gives and then she gets. So that's a great example. So I love that. I really like what you said in terms of the engagement and in terms of the being aware and just being out there and communicating. So that is so important. So here's another question. So let's say our listeners are listening they're listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, okay, I want to start working with ContentBacon, or I want to hire somebody to do the content for me. But, so what are some of the questions that people usually, or what's some of the objections that immediately comes to mind when they think, okay, I'm now going to hire somebody to do my content? What do you hear most often?
So one of the big ones is, well, how are you going to write for me? No one knows my business, like me. How are you going to write for me in a way that sounds like me? And so one of the answer to that is, one, our team is made up of professional writers and editors and strategists, so it's the job of a professional writer and editor to write in a way that reflects your voice, your tone, your personality, and also takes into consideration who you're talking to and what's important to them. But it's really about our process. So we've developed, an extremely thorough and in-depth onboarding process to get to know the customer, the voice, the personality, what works, what doesn't, who your target audience is, so that we can write in a way that generates the kind of results you're looking for. So that part for us is really easy because that's what we do. And it's if you're trying to hire someone, to write for you, like knowing what their process is, if they think like right out of the gate they're going to be able to do it, that's usually a setup for disappointment, because it does take something. It's not, it's not super, it's simple. It's not easy. And we've developed what we believe is a process that allows us to do that as quickly as possible.
That's great, Wendy. And that's exactly what will actually get the product. Because, if you're an entrepreneur, think about what you are best at, like whatever your business does. So whether it's service or product, you know how to do it best. So content writing is also a profession. It is a professional activity. Yeah. And you know how to do it best. So that's why you can help people. But sometimes what I encounter, because the same thing happens with me, is like I'm being asked, well, how would you know how I do this or how I do that, or how to, if you don't have that much experience in my industry. And what I say is like, I'm not going to give you advice, like in terms of writing the processes and procedures. Let's say I'm working with a dentist. I'm not going to give them advice on how to do the procedure better, right? Because I have no idea how to fill a cavity or do a crown or Invisalign or whatever they're doing. But I can ask the right questions and I know what a process should look like, right? So it's the same thing. You're not going to give advice to people how to, let's say you're doing a blog for, let's say Chad, he's a concrete contractor. You're not going to give him advice on how to pour concrete better, but right. You can extract enough information and understand what the problems of his potential customers are, what his referral partners want to hear about, like really which audience you are writing to, and then interview and write it correctly. So that is a skill and it can be done. And it needs to be done by a professional. So it actually is something that people will read, and then yes. There will be an ROI to the whole process.
Yes, absolutely. The other perhaps obstacle that we sometimes face is, well, how quickly am I going to see the return on my investment? And again, inbound content strategy, it's a longer game. You're building an asset, and blogs that we've created, content that we've created years ago still perform better for us now. So it's kind of the old adage, like, when's the best time to plant a tree? It was like 10 years ago, but if you haven't done it, do it now, because then you'll begin to reap the reward. So for companies that are looking for super fast ROI, that aren't willing to spend the time, that's usually not a good fit for us. Not that there won't be milestones that we hit along the way. There won't be some early wins. I mean, a lot of times if a company hasn't been consistently sending out any kind of email newsletter, but they have a database that's cold, there's often like low-hanging fruit, things that we can do that will create some results. But really to generate, again, the three key buckets, more awareness, which we measure in traffic, more interest, which we measure in conversions, and ultimately more, clients, which we measure in revenue. Those things take time. And so that can sometimes be a warning sign to us. Like if you're using this as a Hail Mary, then we're not the right fit.
That's exactly right. And I just did a podcast last week with Ryan Redding. That's the second podcast I interviewed him on, and he's a marketing expert. He does websites and SEO, and works mainly with the home improvement industry, right? So like HVAC, plumbing, so home improvement and home services. And we actually talked about 5 myths that people have about marketing. And one of them is that, marketing is the cure-all for all the problems, right? And the other one is that marketing is the only thing that will drive ROI. So I'm investing, I'm hiring somebody to do my marketing, so I expect immediate results, as opposed to looking at it as a whole strategy and a whole part of your organization, together with operations, together with sales, together with investing in your people, right? And hiring correctly. So it's a whole, it's a holistic approach, and it's one part of it, a very important part, but it has to be strategically done so you actually have the results in the future. Because as you said, if you don't start now, it will be 3 years will go by and say, well, I should have started my content strategy 3 years ago. But so now is the time to start if you don't have it, to definitely augment it. If you have one, you have to make sure that it actually works so you can reap the benefits, but also have consistent benefits. Because, we talk about scaling. So if you want to scale, I think one of the things that I find when I'm talking to entrepreneurs, and I think you can relate to it when you started, like you talked about a business with scaling or without scaling, is the systems in order to scale, right? Because let's say you are the only one, you're a solopreneur, or you have some staff, but it's not really scalable. Well, if I'm going to bring more staff, there will be an expense, there will be like an investment, like you talked about. But the thing is, like, I don't have enough sales to actually justify another full-time employee, an additional one. But then if you don't create the sales, you're never, so it's kind of like it's a catch-22. But if you actually create the content, you communicate enough, then the sales will follow, right? Because there will be the conversion, and then you can scale by bringing more people, but you have to be prepared for it. So then when the conversion happens, you can actually service the people, right? So
absolutely,
it's a whole ecosystem that has to work together, and it's not a cure-all like right now. It's not a band-aid, basically.
Yeah. And to your point, you said it earlier, I think really knowing where your time, your value is, and making sure you're using it the best possible way. So, I don't think I might have done in the very early days, but I don't think I've written ever one piece of content for this company. I used to, when I first started with my previous, I was doing it because the best and highest use of my time is, business development or being the visionary. And anytime I'm not spending my time where kind of my genius zone is, I'm holding my company back, as the CEO, as the co-founder, I'm holding myself back. So if I start micromanaging and try to do it, then I'm holding my company back from greatness, versus when I invest in people to do the things that is the best and highest use of their talent, I'm creating, a much bigger, possibility for us to grow into what we want to become. And so I always just look at it like that, when there is that tendency to, wear too many hats, which as entrepreneurs, we all start out that way. But, someone once told me that, entrepreneurs say yes to everything. Successful entrepreneurs say no to most things. And that kind of really stuck with me, because I think there is a place and time where wearing all the hats, hustling, working hard, that fits. But then you get to a point where you're like, what do I really want? What do I really want to create? And then you have to start, being a lot more disciplined.
For sure. I think it's a wonderful piece of advice, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. So thank you for sharing that. Absolutely. So Wendy, it's been a pleasure having you on this podcast. And I know we mentioned ContentBacon, so people obviously can search ContentBacon, but tell us the entire, how to find you. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, I love hearing from listeners. I love, being a resource. You don't have to want to do business with us to reach out to me. So Wendy with the Y at ContentBacon.com. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. Go to our site. You can, find ways to interact with us there. But I'd love to hear, what your listeners are doing around content, what challenges they have. And I'm always happy to be a resource and, help overcome any obstacles that might be in your way, so that you can take advantage of, really, these amazing tools and resources that we all have available to us. Something that really excites me about content is small, mid-sized companies can compete against the behemoths by, just leading with content and being more agile and, putting out really compelling content, because sometimes the larger companies, they get too bureaucratic and they get too, politically correct, and their content starts to become generic. And, I just get excited because, like, again, smaller companies can really compete and win if they're out there. And the only way to be out there is to create content and put it out there.
Absolutely. And also, people should check out your website because it's just fun. It's creative, like the ContentBacon. It's all about, you have to go to the website to understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and there's lots of great resources there for you to start with. So, it's built as a place where we want you to come back to again and again. And, if you're trying to do it on your own, we've got all the tools and resources so that you're guided correctly.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Wendy. It was a great interview.
Thank you, Addie.
Thanks for listening to the System Simplified podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.